Yep. Started.
Great, so lovely to meet you all. So my name is Catherine Slattery. I've recently begun working just back in November there in the People Development Unit in HR. I'm delighted to be working at UCD. So I'm quite new to UCD, but I suppose not new to the subject of mentoring. As John mentioned, I've been involved in it for about 15 or 16 years now, starting off really, I suppose, in peer mentoring in education, but then moving into professional mentoring in community and in workplaces and membership organizations. So I have quite a bit of experience in the area, and I mean, I absolutely love working in this area, generally because you just get to meet an awful lot of people, you know, who want to help others, which is really the key to mentoring. So I'm really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to speak about it today, and I suppose look at it from the point of view of, you know, why would you get involved in mentoring and what can you get out of it? So I suppose one of the things I always wanted to mention is what is mentoring, and sometimes people can have, you know, differing views on this and wondering what exactly is it and what can it do for me? So really it is supporting and it's helping and it's encouraging people so that they can make transitions in either in their knowledge or their work or their thinking. It's so that they can develop skills, improve their performance and maximize their potential. It's, for me, the 3 S's really sum up what mentoring is: a safe pair of ears, a sounding board, and a source of possible solutions. So the safe pair of ears comes from somebody who is objective, who, you know, it's outside the line manager relationship. It's someone for whom you can have a safe environment to practice your skills and ask questions. But mentors are always a really good sounding board as well, because they generally are internal to the organization. They're people who understand the context of somebody's concerns, and they're a source of possible solutions. But I suppose always bearing in mind that mentoring is really about helping to build capability and self-reliance, but helping your mentee to maybe to come up with their own solutions over time. So keeping in mind that mentoring is usually offline, it's very much a mentee driven thing. And one of the things I'll be talking about later is, if you're going to get involved in mentoring as a mentee, you have to be pretty clear, you know, in yourself what you yourself would like to get out of it. And the more clear you are on that, then the more likelihood it is that you will actually achieve your goals. So it's driven by you, the mentee, but at the same time, it's a developmental partnership, and both parties have a lot to gain from the process. And I know some of the people attending here today may have even been mentors in another context, and will recognize that they actually got a lot out of it too. But also the important thing to note as well is, and it's in connection with the whole idea of a source of possible solutions, but that a mentor is a facilitator and not a fixer. And sometimes the temptation for mentors is to rush in there and provide the solutions, but it's important for mentors to be able to take a step back when it comes to that and really lead and guide their mentee through the process of making their own decisions. But all of that is covered in the mentor training, of course, and the mentee training, which is on offer at UCD, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. And also another thing I think which is really important in mentoring, while you know the mentor is supporting and encouraging and helping the mentee, encouraging is a huge aspect of mentoring. It's not always about helping someone improve on, you know, some perceived weaknesses or areas for improvement. Sometimes for mentees, the benefit is working with someone who can actually help you to see and capitalize on the strengths that you have and help you to draw those forward. I suppose I really believe in this quote, you know, I can live for 2 months on a good compliment, because I certainly can. And I think with mentoring, sometimes it's about just being able to connect with someone who can give you those compliments and who can see those strengths and who can encourage you to develop further. So I suppose there's 3 streams of mentoring at UCD, and I know you'll be familiar with some of these already. So as John mentioned, there's a clear pathway for faculty, you know, around supporting faculty at transition points in their career, and really specifically around the process of applying for promotion. So you may be familiar with that process already, but also we're here to talk today about the individual pathway to mentoring. So that's available to professional, technical, faculty, or any of those roles to achieve, you know, objectives that they themselves have set. And that's where the individual side of it comes from. So they're approaching it on an individual level. And also the structured programs that you may be aware of as well, the Aurora program or the NAP program, and mentoring is also available through those. So today we're here to talk about individual mentoring, but in all of these 3 cases, this training is available for all participants. So for mentors and mentees, it's really important that once they decide to get involved, that they take the road to actually attending the training. So really the training, which is, half-day session for both mentors and mentees, it covers what exactly is mentoring and setting a mentoring agreement, using SMART goals for mentees, how to get prepared for the first meeting, and how you can actually sort of, I suppose, start to think about what are the challenges that might come up in this relationship, and how can we work together to ensure that we make the best out of the relationship. So training is coming up in March, which is great. So you have a bit of time to think, or to encourage colleagues to sign up to the training. And that's happening for mentees on the 4th of March and mentors on the 23rd of March. So once people have been trained, you're pretty much ready to go then, and your mentoring partnership can begin. Now, mentoring partnership through the training, it'll be explained that, it often is the best case scenario that it's for the duration of 1 year, to really give it the chance to be a really strong developmental relationship. But that's not to say that you and your mentor could decide that you've actually, you want to achieve something in 6 months or in 9 months. Again, because it's individually driven, this really is up to the mentee to decide what it is, they'd like to achieve and how long they'd like to take to achieve that. But I wouldn't, I suppose, advise any longer than a year. It's a good time frame, but anything from 6 months to a year can be okay as well. So I suppose looking at the individual side of approaching mentoring, I suppose it'd be good to just take a step back as well and say, what are the benefits of mentoring in general? So for in general, for mentees, it is, as I said, a safe environment in which you can ask questions, you can practice skills you want to develop. It's a chance to build on your self-confidence. You can get through conversations with your mentor a really increased, I suppose, understanding of the organizational culture and goals. How do we do things around here? And what are the strategies for success here in this organization? And also it's just an opportunity, because it is such a collaborative developmental relationship. It's a really good opportunity to develop learning and reflective and analytical skills through that relationship. But for mentors as well, I mean, in all the mentors that I've trained and talked to over the years, the key thing they always say is that the huge personal satisfaction they get out of helping other people. But there are other benefits as well, an opportunity to develop their own communication skills, particularly listening skills, because there would be emphasis on listening skills in the training, and it will help, I suppose, in your mentoring relationship, but also in other professional relationships too. So they also get a chance to analyze and reflect as well through the collaborative relationship. And also one of the key things that mentors often get is, I suppose, this chance to broaden their own horizons, talk to people they might not necessarily have actually interacted with much before, and therefore they get new perspectives and fresh viewpoints from the process as well. So you can see that there's huge benefits for mentees and mentors, but I suppose overall then the organization, through offering mentoring or supporting it, does gain members or employees who feel valued and supported, that it isn't the case that they're being asked to just sink and swim. There is a situation where there is somebody there that they can connect with. It also means that, employees, I suppose, become more competent and knowledgeable in their field, because they're getting the chance to connect and feel supported by more experienced colleagues. And also it's an opportunity to develop and nurture leaders for the future in the organization. So there are huge benefits to mentoring, across that whole gamut there. Now, I know many of you will be saying to yourselves, well, look, I've had a mentor in my life. It just wasn't through a formal process. And an informal mentoring relationship can be a hugely powerful just, I suppose, benefit to people in their careers. And I often will have met people who have said that, they had somebody who was just a senior colleague or even a family member who they considered to be a mentor, but it wasn't part of a formal mentoring program. And informal mentoring does have its benefits, because if you've approached someone to be your mentor informally, or if just the relationship grows organically, what that does is it bypasses the whole sort of getting to know you stage of being a mentor or a mentee. You usually have a deep sense of trust with somebody in that kind of informal mentoring relationship, because you already know them quite well. And it tends to be a good match, because you won't approach someone to ask them to be your mentor, or you won't develop into that relationship unless you really like them anyway. So informal mentoring as well can be really, really powerful. But I suppose with formal mentoring, because it is tend to be more structured, there does tend to be training involved, which means that people have their expectations aligned from the beginning. It means that boundaries are defined, and it means also that you can measure the outcomes. So you can actually have a review after a certain period of time and say, well, how are you getting on? And what can we do to improve this process and help you? Or is there things in training that you think you could have preferred to have in training to help you in this relationship? So formal mentoring, I suppose, does provide those benefits, but it also provides that crucial objectivity as well from the mentor. So that's why I suppose sometimes in informal mentoring, people may find that their mentors may hold back on giving them certain advice because they may not want them to leave their team or leave their organization. So an informal mentor or a formal mentor tends to be more off to the side, you know, offline, as we say, and outside of that sort of maybe line management or team relationship, or even within the same department, they tend to be somebody who has that objectivity because they have no vested interest in what their mentee actually does. So I also just briefly wanted to mention about mentoring and coaching, because sometimes people can get, confused between the two, and the terms are often used interchangeably, which can be confusing also. But I suppose one of the things to note is how much they have in common. So both mentoring and coaching are developmental relationships, and they're both for the benefit of the person who's been mentored or who's been coached. And they both use techniques such as listening and observing and questioning. And they both require, a good bit of commitment and engagement from both parties in order to ensure that they work. But I suppose the differences, if we think about what is different between mentoring and coaching, coaches do tend to be sort of expert in specific skills or areas such as career planning or goal setting, and they're often external to the organization or context, and they set the agenda with the coachee. So they've used those two questioning techniques, they use their listening skills, and then they will work with the coachee to come up with an agenda or an action plan that they have helped them to set up. With mentors, I suppose mentors tend to be sourced internally. So within the organization, it's probably not best to have a mentor, too close to you, too close to your unit or school, but somebody who's still understands the context of the organization itself. So because of that, they've been there, done that, and they have a really good sense of your concerns and your challenges because they're operating within the same context as you, and they can use their own experiences therefore then to help you. Always, I suppose, focusing on that encouraging of capability and self-reliance in the mentee. And the agenda does tend to be driven by the mentee because, as we said at the beginning, the process is driven by the mentee. The mentee decides they want this and they go and seek it, and therefore the action plan and any objectives will be set by the mentee in mentoring. So I suppose that leads very well into how you can, I suppose, approach mentoring in the context of UCD. So, you've all heard of the P4G process, the performance for growth process, and, that will be starting up again. The cycle of conversations will be starting up again around April next year. And mentoring is a really good fit within that process, even though, of course, it's, it's distinct and separate from the P4G process. But that is a really good framework which allows you to put together a development plan. And in that development plan, you're kind of focusing on skills, you're focusing on competencies or behaviors. You think, this might support my performance in my current role, or it might help me to think about the future and where my aspirations lie there. So you can, I suppose, use mentoring as a really good fit within that 20% of the 70-20-10 approach to learning and development. So in the UCD P4G process, this is learning and developing through others. So you can see how mentoring really fits in really well there. So to use an example of how this might work is, for example, you might currently be working in HR, you might be on your career level 2, and the competencies there are saying, you need to have a 1 in building relationships and 2 at communicating effectively. But through your P4G conversation, you may have a conversation with your line manager in which you say, I do hope to move to level 3 in the next year or 2. And the competencies there it's building relationships 2 and communicating effectively 3. And there's several other competencies which I'm really confident and happy, but these are two in which I'd really like to work on over the next year. So you may decide then you'll approach somebody and a colleague who you can identify who's continually developed and demonstrated those skills, and someone you admire and someone who's you would like to emulate in terms of their ability to communicate effectively and their ability to build relationships. So you can approach them with this very specific goal in mind. So you can see how it really fits in quite nicely into that particular component of the P4G framework. So it was, how can they help you once you've met them and once you've approached your mentor and you've attended your training? I mean, what can they actually help you with? Well, they can help sharing what they know. So their professional knowledge, their insights into career paths and organizational culture in higher education. So they may have vast experience even before UCD in this area, and they will bring all of that knowledge and experience to the table, but also their own personal journey, what they've done. So how did they get to where they are today? How did they build a professional profile? How did they increase their competencies in building relationships or communication effectively? What do they see as the strategies for success? And how can they work with you to help you build that capability yourself? And it's who they are. And people who take part in mentoring, they always are incredibly willing to help. They do need to be objective and they need to be prepared for the process. Because it is a very close developmental partnership, and they have to have that focus on fostering capability and self-reliance in you, the mentee. But even if they're not naturally like that, they will attend training, which will give them the tools which will help them to be an effective mentor. So I suppose there are some common pitfalls in mentoring, and I think it's always good to mention these. These are things that I would have seen come up over, I suppose, long time working in the area of mentoring, but I do find that most of these can actually be combated by people attending training and engaging in it and following, I suppose, the guidelines that they might be given during training. So part of the reason sometimes mentoring relationships don't work out is because of lack of preparation. So maybe the mentee isn't really prepared for what they want to get out of the process, or that people haven't attended training and their expectations aren't aligned as to what is required. It can be difficult if there's no trust established or trust is broken, or there's just poor communication between the two people, where there can be a mismatch of expectations, where one person is expecting to get something out of it that the other never going to provide, or it can be just no sense of structure, or a personality clash can happen as well. So I suppose it's important going into the process that you think, well, how can I do my best to ensure that I can make the most of this relationship and that we don't kind of fall foul of these common pitfalls. So one of the things that can actually happen, as I mentioned there, is a mismatch of expectations. And this also relates to people's mentoring styles in terms of how they approach helping people or how they actually like to be helped. So to help me demonstrate this question, Rita has kindly agreed, Rita, haven't you, to answer a question for me. Thank you, Rita. So I'm going to suggest that Rita, which I know is not the case, Rita, of course, but I'm going to suggest, Rita, that you are a mentee who really, really wants to improve your public speaking skills. You find that you're very anxious before giving any kind of presentations. You feel it's really hindering you from applying for more senior roles because there's more presenting involved. And you've confided this to your mentor, and you've said to your mentor that you'd like to work on this as one of your objectives throughout the mentoring relationship. So are you happy with that, Rita?
I am indeed.
Okay, so you're going to meet three possible mentors. So the first mentor is mentor A, and mentor A says to you, Rita, I have the most perfect solution. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down with you. We're going to go through every single bit of the presenting process, the technology, the eye contact, the voice projection, every single bit of it. And we're going to pinpoint which is the bit that's causing you the most stress. And we're going to put together a list of things that you're going to work on out of that. Okay, that's mentor A. Mentor B says to you, I've got the perfect solution. Tomorrow I have a meeting with several senior colleagues. I'm going to invite you along to the meeting and you can present to us for 5 minutes on a topic of your choosing, and we will give you feedback as to how you've done. And that'll be a great opportunity to get feedback from really senior people about what your skills are and aren't in that area. And mentor C says that they are not the best at presenting themselves, and they are aware of that, but they would like to actually introduce you to a colleague in another area who actually, has a really, really good reputation for fantastic skills schools and has won Toastmasters awards, etc., etc. So Rita, what do you think when you think of those possibilities? Which one do you sort of lean towards?
I would say C with a little bit of A as
Okay,
well.
very interesting. Yes, so why is that?
I'd imagine with C, it gives you the opportunity to find out for yourself, and the mentor has actually confided, well, not confided, it has opened up and said, it's not my key strength, but I can put you in touch with somebody who is. A little bit of A, well, I'd say when you'd mentioned A, the first thing they said was, I've got the perfect approach. And that would always be a bit of a, I don't think there is a perfect approach to this. So it would depend on the style as well. So that's why I said just a little bit of A, just because there's a bit more of a plan to it, I guess. But C would be my preference if I had to go with one.
Okay, and what about B? What about going in and presenting to a group of people the next day?
That would scare the bejesus out of me for sure,
yeah.
right? Because that is everything that I would be anxious. These are senior people. I would be in knots before it. So that would be a big no-no. That is like feeding into my anxiety.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Really interesting. Okay, thank you very much, Rita, for answering that question for me. So I suppose what that demonstrates there is Rita, she did lean towards C with a little bit of A. I have done this exercise, a lot of times over the course of my career, and I would say that the majority of people pick A. They like the idea of being nurtured through the process. So this is the nurturer mentor. So they work with their mentee to pinpoint strengths and weaknesses, and they help them to clarify what it is they want to achieve and why. The second mentor, the challenger mentor, this is the kind of person who wants to take on the kind of role of a critical friend. So they throw you in the deep end, they challenge assumptions, they test your limits. And the third one, Rita's preferred one mostly, is a networker mentor. So they like their opportunity to give their mentee opportunity to meet other people and make connections, hear from other people who are, really well, I suppose, who have a good breadth of knowledge in their field, and they love to make those kind of connections. And all of these particular styles and approaches to mentoring are absolutely valid, and all of them can be of huge use at specific times in the mentoring relationship. So it may be at the case where a nurturer mentor is maybe something that is more required at the beginning of the relationship, and potentially some challenging might happen more towards the end of the relationship when the mentor and mentee know each other a little bit better. But what can happen sometimes is that in the first few months of a relationship, if you don't actually kind of talk about this before you go in to start the relationship, and you don't just sort of talk about it as a part of your mentoring agreement, what can happen is people go into this expecting a networker and they get a nurturer, or they really want a nurturer and they get a challenger. So and that can be very off-putting for either party. I've had mentors who really want to be the nurturer, and all the mentee wants is those connections, and that can be very off-putting for them. And it can be, they suppose they feel shortchanged from the work that they're going to put into this, that the person isn't expecting it. So it's really important to think about as a mentee when you're going into it, and as a mentor, but as a mentee, how do you like to be helped, and to communicate that to your mentor, because that's again you driving the process and you ensuring that you get what you need out of it. It may not be your mentor's natural way to be a challenger, but if that's what you want, then it's really good to actually have that conversation. Everyone is different, as it has just been demonstrated there by Rita and all of the people who would usually take part in this. They always have different answers. I've had people say they wouldn't want to be introduced to someone else because that would mean their mentor was fobbing them off onto someone else. So very interesting perspectives on this. Mentoring style is really important, and good to have that conversation when you're preparing for mentoring. So I suppose, like as I mentioned, the mentoring relationship goes through stages. It doesn't remain static. So at the beginning you're exploring, by the end you're reflecting. So the first meeting is really key to building the foundations of a strong mentoring relationship, and the final meeting is really important to provide closure. Thinking about, look, what have we achieved? What kind of future relationship will we have beyond this? So before you even attend training, and mentioned about the training dates coming up in March, it's really important to start to consider what are the key areas that are kind of personal and intrinsic to the relationship for me. So again, going back to that idea that it's driven by the mentee. So it's thinking about your motivation. Why do you want this? What is it that you would like to get out of it? Thinking about your previous mentoring experiences. So you may have had a brilliant mentor experience in the past, which has really left you with a positive idea about the process, or you may have not had such a great experience, but you will bring all those previous experiences to this relationship. So it's worth reflecting on those before you get involved with your new mentoring relationship. Mentoring styles, as I mentioned, how do you like to be helped? And how are you going to communicate that to your mentor so that they can be an effective mentor for you? Trust, boundaries, and confidentiality, all really important in mentoring. And of course, that they will be covered in your training session when you get ready for the relationship. As will skills. Now, the skills for a mentee are just as important as the skills for a mentor. A mentor needs to be an amazing listener. A mentor needs to be patient. A mentor needs to be good at asking questions. But a mentee needs to be self-aware. They need to have a good idea about the kind of person they are and I suppose the impact of their behavior on others. You know, are they really good at communicating effectively? Are they not so great at building relationships? And how has that affected them? So first of all, to be able to, really reflect yourself as a mentee and be able to communicate that to your mentor, and then to be able to take initiative in the process. But again, the training will cover that as well. And set aside the time for the training is really important. So to book your place in the March training. And we'll move on then to thinking about who you might, approach to be your mentor. And then you would start to put the structure of the mentoring relationship in place. So this is all stuff that you would actually do really, I suppose, as you get ready for the mentoring relationship. So the training you can book via the people development there on InfoHub, and you would just click the HR mentoring icon there. And as I mentioned, 4th of March for mentees and the 23rd of March for mentors. So you can book that now. But I suppose thinking about who you might approach to be your mentor is also a really key thing that usually comes up for people. So I suppose there's a few things to mention here. Try to look beyond any line management or reporting relationships, because it is, as we said, best as offline help and slightly removed from that situation, and to look, if possible, outside your own school, because it does help to ensure then that the relationship sort of keeps that developmental focus, and it avoids any potential conflict of interest or lack of objectivity on behalf of the mentor. And it gives you an opportunity to broaden your network and meet new people and embrace ideas and approaches, from beyond your, I suppose, own specific context. Who is it that you admire, in UCD? Who's had, career progression that you would like for yourself? Who has the success, the qualities that you respect? So you can ask for advice from people in your areas, or discuss it with your manager, discuss it with your head of school, if there's people that you have in mind. But to really, again, going back to that idea that it's a mentee driven process, to really have the ideas yourself. Now, try not to choose someone who's too much like you, because it will be really good to learn from someone who has different perspectives and fresh viewpoints. And sometimes people do approach someone because they feel, oh, that person could be my friend. But it's a different kind of relationship from a friendship. It's a professional developmental relationship. So sometimes it's good to sort of go for somebody who you might not necessarily have thought you would get on particularly well with, or who's someone who you feel is very much like you. There definitely is a list of mentors available through Pod of people who have been trained, and these were people who have gone through the Aurora mentor training process and will have mentored people prior in UCD. But I suppose again too, it's really important for UCD to develop and expand the pool of mentors that are available. And I suppose if we all just kept choosing from that list, I suppose what would happen is no one else would ever get asked to be a mentor. So we do want to encourage people to choose and select mentors that would be suitable for them, and then for those mentors to attend training. And that way we can build a community of trained and experienced mentors, and that will really be a huge element then, and I suppose fostering a whole culture of mentoring at UCD. So we want to expand the pool of mentors, which would be great. And who is best suited to being your your safe peer reviewers, your standing board, and your source of possible solutions. So to bring it back again to you. I suppose just to give you a bit of an idea about the structure of the relationship, and I know, of course, you'll be covering this in training, but it's a really good idea, Jen, you'll be encouraged to do so, to set a mentoring agreement where you say, okay, this is how long our mentoring relationship is going to last. This is when we're going to meet. What do we want to get out of this? What do both parties want to get out of this? And what are we afraid of? If I'm a mentor and I'm afraid I'm going to keep interrupting you and I'm going to talk too much as a mentor, put that into the agreement. If you're a mentee who feels they might take too much of a step back and not be driving the process enough, put that into the agreement. And then take time at the end of each meeting to have a look and say, are we doing this? Are we, doing our best to be effective mentors and mentees? Because that way you're sort of keeping an eye on the process as well as the progress of the relationship as you go on. So if the mentoring agreement helps to put structure, and it's something that's, I suppose, developed together. It doesn't even have to be necessarily something you're writing down, but articulating together is really important at the beginning. And then throughout the relationship, another way to put structure on it is to have an action plan. So it can be a really useful resource. It can serve as a meeting agenda. It can serve as a tool for reflection at the end of the process. And it's always something that could be evolving as the relationship progresses. And it may not be the same at the end as it was at the beginning. But in an actual plan, you would actually outline the areas in which you wanted. So for example, that example I gave earlier of the person who wanted to really build on those 2 competencies, you might say, these are the competencies in which I would like to work on. And these are my objectives. I want to get more confidence. I want to be able to demonstrate that I have that competency. And what's the mentoring input going to be? So they will be able to say, yeah, I can help you with this. We can have a lot of talking about this, a lot of conversations, and I'll ask questions and help you to explore how you yourself might build more confidence in this area. You might use a goal setting tool, which will be explained to training about how all that would work in the context of mentoring. Then you might put a time frame on it so that you kind of have something that you can look at every meeting and say, where are we with these objectives and how are we going with them? So it really helps people to keep, I suppose, a structure on it as the process continues. So the action plan is really, really useful. I suppose looking at preparing for the relationship, we've talked about all of these areas, your motivation, your previous experiences, the styles, the stuff that you will need to cover in training, and, I suppose how you might go about getting a mentor and how you might put a bit of structure on the relationship. I'm, of course, really happy to answer any questions after this presentation about any of those aspects. But I suppose setting aside time for training is the key thing now to make sure that you're booked into those March sessions and you have a bit of an idea about, what you would like to get out of this. If you're a mentee, there is time between attending a March 4th session and then approaching a mentor and asking them to attend a training on the 23rd of March. But if you had an idea now about who your mentor would be, you could let them know that this is coming up and they could book it straight away. So you could both be ready to get going then at the end of March. So I suppose I love this quote, if we always helped each other, no one would need luck. And that really is the key thing to mentoring about, other colleagues helping other people. And the connections that you make through that process are so beneficial, as I mentioned, to, I suppose, both you, your mentor, and the organization. So I really encourage you to take the opportunity of getting involved in mentoring. And I'll finish my presentation now, but if we have any questions or comments or suggestions, I'd only be too delighted to talk further about them.
Thanks very much, Catherine. That was a great presentation, and yeah, it's very easy to understand, I found anyways. I think the recording can be switched off